What is money? It seems like an easy question to answer, but coins today aren't the same as they were 1,000 years ago, or even as near as 50 years ago. In the ancient times, long before the Roman Empire, transactions were conducted through bartering, the trading of products and or services. But two people or groups of people did not always have something that the other wanted. And how could you establish an exchange rate that indicated that 5 apples were worth 2 pears? So this made currency necessary. There is one currency that has and continues to dominate more than 70% of all international transactions, the US dollar. If you were to exchange Colombian pesos to Russian rubles, you would have to first exchange it into dollars. Same with euros to Japanese yen, you first sell the euros for US dollars and then buy the yen from those dollars. The US dollar fluctuates freely. There is no fixed exchange rate. The US dollar can be worth more or less depending on market forces, and only one entity can print and authorize the use of the US dollar, the United States Federal Reserve. In this context, Venezuela is experiencing an economic collapse, where more than 15% of Venezuelans have left their country. Hyperinflation has reached 2 million%. Prices rise not just every day, but every hour. It has become extremely complicated to establish fixed prices. The current minimum wage is at $36, and $2 on the black market. More than 95% of Venezuelans live in poverty. In such an economic collapse, why not opt for the US dollar as a national currency? Would that even be possible or reliable? Today, we will explore the possibilities and issues of this action. Let's begin. So what is inflation? Well, it is the continuous and widespread increase of prices within a country. For many years, many developing countries consider inflation as harmful, so most try their best in order to counter this. However, inflation is not necessarily a problem when controlled. Rather, one could say that it is a sign of a healthy economy when it is at around 2 or 3%, which is just a slight augmentation in price each year. During the times of World War II, or the first oil crisis, times were turbulent at the economic and political level. Inflation in the US or Europe could easily surpass 100%, which is practically a doubling of prices in a matter of years without increasing wages. Germany in early 1920 suffered from hyperinflation that traumatized the country even to this day. Prices at the time altered in minutes, and a truck full of cash was required to buy a single onion. Curiously today, Germany is one of the countries that are most reluctant to use credit or debit cards. Most Germans prefer to use their euros in cash since it gives a better sense of control, unlike countries such as France or Belgium where most transactions are done by card. In the current state of money and currency, when a country encounters economic issues or has an external shock, its currency can lose value against the dollar. For example, when Trump won the election in 2016, the Mexican peso depreciated considerably, and when the UK voted to leave the EU, the pound sterling depreciated against the euro and the US dollar. In the case of Argentina, the government allowed the peso to fluctuate freely against the dollar, but this was a double-edged sword. 1 US dollar was equivalent to 13 pesos at the time, but now, a single dollar equals to 39 pesos. What happened was that investors lost confidence in the Argentinian economy despite the IMF's large injection. The depreciation of the country has not helped Argentina, which has the highest inflation in the continent just after Venezuela. But the case of Venezuela is very particular. There hasn't been a situation like this in the continent wherein there is more than 2 million% inflation. There are numerous cases for the inflation in Venezuela: the destruction of domestic productivity, the lack of confidence in investors, the lack of guarantees, and the excessive printing of bills by the Venezuelan government. If you don't have enough bills circulating, one might think the easiest solution would be to print more. But this is only going to inflate prices since there are more bills going around. Another factor to consider was that an earlier exchange of the bolivar against the dollar had been applied, even before the government of Hugo Chavez. Therefore, depending on the reason, for example travel or business, you could get 4 bolivars against the dollar or even 7 bolivars per dollar. The control of change in Venezuela already existed before Hugo Chavez, but in 2003, Chavez reinforced it with the creation of a government entity, and that further restored access and foreign currency. Establishing a strict foreign exchange policy, if the government of the country in question is not trustworthy, there will always be a parallel exchange rate in the black market, which means the natural forces of the market establish the price of the currency. This is known as the parallel dollar. So as you can see in the following graph, the black line represents the official rate at which the Venezuelan government considered the exchange between a bolivar and a dollar. Since the Chavez government, there had already been a parallel dollar. But with his death and Maduro's assumption, the situation had only worsened. You can see that from August 2012 to November 2014, the bolivar lost 90% of its value in the parallel market. At that time, $1 was worth 100 bolivars. From November 2014 to September 2016, a little more than a year and a half later, it had lost another 90% of its value. $1 was then worth 1,000 bolivars. In another 10 months, July 2017, another decrease of 90% occurred, and the value worsened even further, $1 being 10,000 bolivars. This trend was occurring exponentially, occurring faster and faster, and by June 2018, $1 was worth 1 million bolivars. The truth is, the bolivar is now worthless. Even with Maduro's attempt to extract multiple zeros from the currency to prevent it from losing its value, the sovereign bolivar has already lost more than 95% of its value. The currency launched by Maduro in mid-2018 has now lost more than 120% of its value. The Maduro government has increased the minimum wages by several hundred% over the years, but even if it's 3 times the current salary, this doesn't match the level of devaluation of the currency. Faced with this situation, the population can either return to the most essential form of monetary exchange, to barter, or to take refuge in another currency to carry out their monetary transactions. In general, a highly used foreign currency is the US dollar or the euro. There are already many establishments and businesses in Venezuela that give their prices in dollars, but the lack thereof is an impediment for the transactions to be carried out. Having a dollar in the parallel market in Venezuela is like having a gold mine, because it is the only thing of value in which the Venezuelans can cling to. To be able to analyze a country that had unchecked inflation during a financial crisis, we have to see the case of a dollarized South American country, Ecuador. In 1999, Ecuador suffered from a banking crisis that crippled the nation. A contracting GDP at several points had caused more than 2 million Ecuadorians to leave the country due to the very poor conditions. More than 15% of the population at the time had left. The nefarious handling of the economy had caused the national currency of Ecuador to devalue, rendering it virtually worthless. Facing this crisis, the government of Ecuador decided to abandon the currency for the US dollar in order to beat the crisis and to avoid such a situation from reoccurring. Ecuador's internal crisis had caused the central bank to lose its functions and instead trusted in the US Federal Reserve and DC. Dollarization is a controversial issue, but so far, Ecuador has had partial success with this. Having the dollar as a currency has made it easy for the country to import from their neighbors, but had made their exports more expensive. Now, it doesn't matter what sort of government is in charge of the country. It will not be able to print their own bills or devalue their currency to their liking, since they had practically renounced their monetary policy. Opting for the dollar, Ecuador has reduced inflation to almost 0%, which isn't positive either, but it is certainly better than the hyperinflation in Venezuela. The dollar has made Ecuador have one of the highest wages in the continent, but also making it one of the most expensive countries to live in. So could and should Venezuela adopt the US dollar? In order to adopt the US dollar, Venezuela first needs a new government. Maduro and his regime will never accept any foreign currency and will prefer to live in their bubble, convincing themselves that inflation doesn't exist. Once a new government assumes power, the Venezuelan currency will surely be worth nothing. The country will be, if it isn't already, in a state of total inactivity. So enter the US dollar. It would surely fight the currency's inflation, as the renouncing of their own monetary policy will take away the country's power to devaluate their own currency, as is currently the case. On the other hand, there are hidden costs if Venezuela was to opt to dollarization. They would lose total control of its currency. The US dollar would be under the control of the US Federal Reserve, and the dollar's appreciation or depreciation could be as harmful as it could be beneficial. Venezuela would undoubtedly lose monetary sovereignty. It would become the 4th country in the region to dollarize after El Salvador, Panama, and Ecuador. Salaries in dollars would be extremely low in the beginning, and once Venezuela is dollarized, there is no going back. Returning to a hypothetical future bolivar would cause an economic cataclysm, but they're already facing one now. At this point, where the Venezuelan currency is worthless, the new government of Venezuela may have no choice but to dollarize to begin the reconstruction of the country. It must be emphasized that the dollarization of Venezuela could only occur once the Maduro regime is no longer in power. Otherwise, it is impossible. Dollarization would be an interesting step forward for Venezuela, but it can be complex and complicated to understand. I will try to delve into this topic further and maybe talk about the possible dollarization for Argentina. So what do you think about this issue? Do you think Venezuela should apply dollarization once a new government assumes power? Do you think this would be an effective measure at all? Let us know in the comments below. I hope you liked this video, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.